Good morning, kids. I know it's weird that we're not seeing each other today, but today is Thursday, September 24th, and you do have asynchronous work or independent work that you're doing today. So I am going to share with you an on this day, even though we don't have class together today. And then I'm going to lecture on a couple of the sections just about the legacy of Rome, and you're going to take notes on that. And then I'm going to just explain the comic assignment one more time so that at least if you forgot from yesterday, it's in a video so you know what's going on. Okay, so on this day in history, in 1789, the first Supreme Court takes place. So the Judiciary Act of 1789 was passed by Congress and signed by President George Washington, establishing the Supreme Court as a tribunal of 6 justices. So the Supreme Court is it's the highest kind of court in the land, not kind of, it is the highest court in the land, and they are responsible for interpreting law. We talked about Ruth Bader Ginsburg the other day, and she was a Supreme Court justice. And now there are 9 justices instead of 6. But they were to serve until death or retirement, which is usually, that is very true. That's exactly what they do. And when a seat comes open, whoever is the president at that time, depending on when it happens, they get to appoint the person who fills that spot. George Washington nominated John Jay to preside as the Chief Justice. So there is one of the now 9 justices is the Chief Justice. And then by the 26th of September in that year, all appointments were confirmed by the Senate, which still exists today. The Senate has to confirm all Supreme Court justices. And then the Supreme Court was established by Article 3 of the Constitution. You probably don't have a ton of knowledge of the Constitution yet. That's okay. And the first session of the Supreme Court was held on February 1st of 1790. So there's your kind of original group of people with some of the more notable Supreme Court justices. And there might be a time where we talk more about that in the future. Okay, so what are we talking about? Well, we're going to talk about the legacy of ancient Rome today. This is kind of, it's going to feel like a review based on what you already read in the textbook. However, what you are going to do while I give notes or give this lecture and moving forward, this is how a lot of our lectures are going to be. We'll fluctuate between kind of 2 different formats of lecture notes, some where you fill in the blank like you have already, and some where you write down what's in red and blue. So what your notes are going to look like, what you should be writing. Okay, the first thing that I should see written is the section title. So for example, the section title of this is 1.3, the legacy of Roman art. So I should see that at the top of your lecture notes. And I will post like a sample just so you kind of understand better because we're not in person with one another. And then as I'm lecturing on this page of notes, you should be writing down what's in blue and red. That's the most important information. All the other stuff is mostly for me to make sure that I don't miss any of my main points. So that's how this is going to work, okay? So it's a video, so you can pause if you need to pause. I'm going to go as at my pace, but again, it's a video, so you get to choose how long it takes you. So first, the legacy of Roman art. Now we know that the Roman Empire was quite large, so we can look at, this is the extent of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire, the art was heavily influenced by the Greeks, and you know this, a lot of Roman culture comes from Greece, okay? And many forms of Roman art reflected what the ancient Greeks produced. So here on here you have some examples of that. You have some coinage, we have some frescoes, a bust. So Roman art became more innovative than traditional Greek art, and there are lots of ways they were able to do this. So art was diverse due to the size of the empire. You have to remember the western part of the empire was a lot different than the eastern part of the empire. And we see that because the Western Empire is the side that ends up collapsing and the East ends up thriving. Then something that's important to remember too is that's kind of how it was. The East is the side that thrived. Trade was great. It was a little bit closer to where the Silk Road was, and trade with East Asia, or excuse me, not East Asia, Asia, and other places in the Middle East. So that side thrived. The western side was where the barbarian invasions were taking place, and it was much more unstable and a little bit scarier. The regions that were most known for their art were Alexandria, the east, Antioch, also the east, and Athens. Okay, so those are the three regions that were best known, or best cities best known for their art. The most famous forms of art were seal cutting, jewelry. Yes, they had jewelry. I think I have more examples of that later. Glassware, mosaics, pottery, frescoes, statues, and monumental architecture, which is a lot of what we still see today. So art forms popular that were used by the Romans. First, we have mosaics. So these are pictures made up of like smaller pieces of glass and tile or colored stone. So you can tell if you look at these mosaics, you can see the little pieces, right? Super cool. It seems super tedious. I probably don't have the patience to make a mosaic. But it was a common feature of private homes and public buildings, so you would have seen this throughout the Roman Empire. And popular topics of mosaics were often scenes from mythology, gladiator contests, sports, agriculture, hunting, food, and sometimes realistic portraits of Romans. So you can see that here. We have someone, riding a horse, probably off into battle. We have some hunting here, and then we have some people. And each city had its own style. The city of Rome used a lot of black and white materials, where other places might have done different things. You can tell here too, like this is a mosaic of a Roman soldier. So lots of different art forms. Another thing that they did were wall paintings, most notably a fresco. Okay, so this is an example of a fresco. And it is scenes painted on moist plaster of walls or ceilings with water-based paints. These again can be seen in a lot of public buildings, private homes, temples, tombs, and even military structures. So you can tell they cared about art if they're in a variety of places. Artists preferred natural earth colors such as darker shades of reds, yellows, browns, and blue and black, which you can also see in this fresco here. And I feel like even in the mosaics, you can see that as well. And then by the 3rd century CE, one of the best sources of wall painting come from the Christian catacombs. And those you can look up if you're interested to see what they look like. Oh, I do have brain breaks in my lectures. So this is fun. So I coach high school basketball at Del Oro, and we do these really fun staff games, but it's not like the staff versus the students. It's Del Oro staff, and this one was versus Granite Bay staff, and this was the second year we've done it. They've done it 3 years because last year coronavirus. So I played 2 of the years, and this picture specifically was the year they wouldn't let me play because the year before I played and we won, and it was super fun, and I had the most fun ever. And so then the next year they were like, well, it's not fair. She doesn't actually teach there, which I didn't. I was a substitute and a coach, but I subbed every day. And that's where all my paychecks came from. And they didn't like that I played well. But it was really fun. And so the back of our shirts could say whatever you want. And this year my shirt said Free Coach K. And they had signs in the crowd that said that. It was pretty fun. Okay, sculptures. I think you've seen this in the couple of videos I've shown you. This is a sculpture of, I believe, Augustus. But Roman sculptures blended the idealized perfection of earlier classical Greek sculptures with greater aspirations of realism. And that means they wanted a more realistic version of what people look like. Now, kids, this is super important to remember because in some months when we circle back to parts of Europe, when we get to the Renaissance, this is what they're going to try and reinvent. Renaissance means rebirth, a rebirth of culture. The culture that they're rebirthing is Roman culture. You are seeing how important Rome is and how just, it's mind-boggling the things that they were able to do, but you have to remember the western part of Europe. Remember, barbarians everywhere, attacking tribes all over the place. No stability. In the East, there is stability and they thrive, okay? But in the West, and that's where the Renaissance is going to start. The Renaissance is going to start in Italy, which is in Western Europe, okay? In that region, that's where the term dark ages comes from, because nothing is really great during this time, okay? So they're going to dip for a while, and then they're going to pop back up out of this into the Renaissance and start creating artwork like this again, and it's going to be better. It's going to be beautiful, and I'm really excited to get to there. Anyway, so sculptures, it mixed the styles prevalent in Eastern art. So again, when we refer to East, that means maybe the Middle East or like the eastern part of Europe, as well as Asian countries. They favored the use of bronze and marble in their works, which you can see. And most surviving works were made out of marble. Marble lasts a really long time. And they produced miniature versions of Greek originals, so they would like recreate things, which is kind of cool too. Other notable art forms. So this is where you can see some of this little snake-like thing. That's a bracelet. And then we'll talk about the cameos in a second, which is this woman here, and then the glassware below. So other notable art forms would have been blown decorative glass blow bottles, which is this bottom picture. They were made using less glass, and they were able to make glass products a lot quicker when they were glass blown. So I think there's like, I've seen videos where you can see how glass is blown into these kind of figures, which is kind of cool. Cameos were carved decorations showing a portrait or a scene, and they often depicted mythology. Again, the heroes in Greek and Rome were really important to them. And then gem cutting and metalworking, so rings, necklaces, bracelets, brooches, buckles, earrings, pendants, anklets, and hairnets were all super important to these people. And they had extraordinary detail and craftsmanship. I think you get that at this point, like watching the engineering and empire, you understand how incredible they were able to do some things. So Roman or Greco-Roman art was rediscovered during the Renaissance period, which is what I was just talking about. And the Renaissance glorified the ancient past, focusing on the Greeks and Romans. That's the only people they really kind of formed their art after. And the contributions of Roman art include a determination to record actual historical events, and they believed in realistically portraying humble citizens. None of these were wholly new in art, but the Romans were able to kind of make that their focus, right? They were able to kind of boom, right? And then Romans cultivated the idea of loving art for the sake of loving art. And people throughout the world today love art. Art is really important. It's something that is part of history and I don't know, I have a much deeper appreciation for art as I've gotten older. So yeah, the legacy of Roman architecture and engineering. So this is a new section, and so now you might want to skip a line or two and write the legacy of Roman architecture and engineering. And I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because you have a really good idea about the engineering. So they used techniques from the Egyptians and Greeks and then added their own style. Too, they used things from the Etruscans and other groups that were around them. And again, they just made them better, okay? They built an urban-centered society. We saw how they would build these forums and bathhouses that invited community, right? And we still value and treat Roman architecture and engineering with a great deal of respect and care. A lot of it lasted, you guys. You can go to Rome and see a lot of this. I can't wait to do it. They mastered the use of arches, vaults, and domes, and we saw all of that in engineering and empire. We see arches in the Colosseum. We saw vaulted ceilings throughout many of and then the dome in the Pantheon, which you saw how they were able to like make it without any buttresses, which was really incredible. And 4 million people still visit the Pantheon today. They use concrete to build. We talked about this a lot at the Engineering and Empire. You know what? I'm going to backtrack for a second. You don't need to write this slide down because you've already heard a lot of this. So I'm just going to review it. They were first to use cement on such a large scale, and 10 billion tons of cement is used worldwide today. And then the Colosseum, holds thousands of spectators and is a model of what stadiums still look like today. So here's some more examples of Roman architecture you already know. Engineering, again, you don't need to write this slide because we've already talked about this quite a bit. So they created the Appian Way, which is the oldest Roman road running from Rome to southern Italy, and it illustrates the slogan, "All roads lead to Rome." You've seen the map of how their road system, and you saw how their roads were created. And then the aqueducts are also extremely important. They were able to have fresh water and running water, which is not something we're going to see for a long time. When we talk about the western part of Europe after this unit, you're going to see the unsanitary conditions of Western Europe and how nasty it was and why people got sick all the time. Where in Rome, that wasn't necessarily the case because they had some running water options. So much of the architecture was used throughout the medieval period, which again, we'll spend a lot of time. We get to watch a cool castles video to see what they used to do with castles, and a lot of how they built castles is going to come from Rome. And then the water system in Segovia, Spain still uses, this is so crazy, still uses part of the ancient Rome aqueducts, which is amazing. And then 4 million people still visit the Colosseum today. And okay, new one. Again, skip a line, 1.5, the legacy of Roman language and writing. So a lot of what we do has Latin roots, which is what they spoke in Rome. Okay, that was the language of the time, and they wrote and spoke in Latin. You know what a scribe is because we talked about scribes all the time in 6th grade. A scribe is a person who is trained to write or copy documents by hand. The first time we see this is with cuneiform in Egypt. Remember back. Cool. So after the fall of Rome, the Roman Empire, they still used Latin. Latin was the official language of the Catholic Church, and it was something that wasn't really, they didn't speak Latin to each other in the Catholic Church necessarily, right? Especially for example, in England, they would have spoke Old English, but they would have read in Latin, and the only people trained to read in Latin would have been the members of the church. So that just created a lot of interesting things that we'll talk about later. But the church was a part of all cultures, which means that Latin is a part of all cultures. A lot of the Western world finds their roots of language in Latin. Communication. So the legacy, the communication, educated European nobles learned Latin to communicate with peers in other countries. It was the language of academia, which is higher education, and we'll talk more about that as we move through this. But modern European nations languages develop from Latin, Italian, Spanish, French. A lot of our words come from all three of those places as well as Old English and Germanic languages. It's this crazy mix, and that's why learning English is so hard if it's your second language. English borrowed heavily from Latin as well. We also use Roman numerals, letters to write numbers. So a lot of the Super Bowl, every year it's a number, right? I don't know, I can't really think of anything else off the top of my head other than the Super Bowl. But some other influences from this time would have been the calendar we use was adopted from Rome's Julius Caesar's calendar, so the Caesarian calendar, very similar. Even July is similar to Julius, August, Augustus, right? We see these parallels. Proverbs was a popular saying meant to express something wise or true. You've heard of Proverbs before also because we talked about that a little bit in 6th grade. And then prefixes come from Latin words for in front of, fasten or attach, right? A lot of these things come from Latin. Okay, so the legacy of Roman philosophy, law, and citizenship. Now, this is maybe the single most important thing we get from ancient Rome because it influences us as Americans so much. So, they were greatly influenced by the Greeks. You know this. The philosophy is the study of wisdom, knowledge, and the nature of reality. Honestly, it's a really kind of it was one of my least favorite classes in college, but it is something that's more interesting to talk about. So one form of kind of their philosophy was Stoicism, and that comes from the Greeks. It was very popular among Romans, and it was a philosophy about living rightly in a way that agreed with nature, involving good character, self-control, and courage. So if you've ever heard someone say, "Oh, they're very stoic," it kind of means that they don't really they're a really like a noble human being, but they might not show an emotion. Like they know how they are supposed to act at all times. And I don't think I think if you've studied Rome or Greece enough, you would get that from like what they value. They duty and the welfare of the community over the personal comfort was really important to them. So that means like nation over individual. And it was fair. They were famous for bearing pain and suffering bravely and quietly. So that what like if someone is saying they're being stoic, like let's say someone a relative passes away and someone handles it in a way where they don't really show emotion, they don't really cry. Someone might describe them as stoic. Not that it's a good or a bad thing, that's just how they would have described them. Law and justice. So things that were inherited from the Romans would have been marriage, inheritances, and contracts were all used during this time, which is incredible to think about. This is so old. Universal law of justice came from nature. Every person had rights, and judges were used to enforce these laws. Kids. When you think about when the United States like was coming to be and revolution was happening throughout the world, the people that like Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, other founding fathers, James Madison, okay, all these old dudes that were helping create the United States, they would have drawn on philosophy from Rome. Super old, right? It just gets me fired up. Anyway, citizenship, that was really important during this time. To be a Roman citizen was an honor. And so citizenship is very important. A Roman was anyone who lived in the city-state of Rome, and it eventually would mean all free people in the empire. Okay. This meant that they were all protected under Roman law and had to follow Roman law. They believed that citizenship was a privilege and a responsibility, which I 100% agree with that. Even today in the United States, being a citizen is a privilege. I live in a country where I have a lot of freedoms, and it's a responsibility. There are things that I have to do in order to be a good citizen, right? I pay my taxes, I vote, I do jury duty, I do, other little things where that's your civic duty, okay? So legal codes in France and Italy are based partly on ancient Rome, which is interesting. The idea of natural rights still exists today. Part of that natural rights, if you know anything about the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote, you will know that he wrote something like basically every person has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, that's natural rights: life, liberty, property. Okay. These basic beliefs that all humans have the right to, and they will resurface again during what's called the Enlightenment. And we probably won't get to the Enlightenment in this class, but that is where you'll pick up when you pick up with world history your sophomore year of high school. It's one of my favorite things to teach. And the idea of citizenship being a privilege and a responsibility is a legacy that's still felt today. So there's your lecture. That was a lot. I haven't done that in a really long time. I promise it's a little bit more fun when we're in the classroom and I get to move around and do stuff with you. Okay, so let's talk about Create a Barbarian comic. All right. So you're going to use this website, hopefully, and you're going to look at different groups of barbarians. It tells you who. You got the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, let's see, the Valens and the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths. You have what does barbarian mean down here. You're going to choose one because you just have to choose one group, all right? And you're going to read the summary on one of the tribes of the barbarians that invaded the Roman Empire. As you read, you're not going to be able to highlight facts. You might just want to take some notes that stick out as possible things you might draw in your comic. And then you're going to create a comic strip telling the story of a barbarian tribe. So choose how many boxes you want your comic to have and fold accordingly. You at least have to have 3. Okay, that makes it, you have to have 3. It's not a comic if there's 1 box. So ideas for your comic might be where did they come from? Where did they travel to? What land did they take over? What were they looking for? How did they receive / steal? How were they treated by other groups? And what strategies did they have to scare their opponents? You're going to get a nice view of what a barbarian would have been at the time. And then get this. Look at all of these examples you get. I did not make this. I bought this assignment. So this is from some kid somewhere else. So you need to start this. So what start means to me is I would say I want you to come to class Monday because we have class together Monday with a rough draft. So everything in pencil so that we can kind of look through it. You should already have, what barbarian group you're going to use and you've started your comic strip. Now you can use whatever. I would rather it be a sheet of white paper opposed to a piece of binder paper, but if you don't have access to that, you don't have access to that. So I would, and then you need to make sure like you have even lines as you're making your comic strip. You've done this before, most of you, right? Also, if you like fold your paper in half and then fold it again, that'll help you make some squares. But I do want you to bring this on Monday so that we can kind of check over it and make sure we're all on the right page. And then that'll be due on September 30th, which is Wednesday. So that's it. If you have any questions, just let me know.